Hello. In this video lesson, we're going to cover the critical reasoning section on the GMAT. We're going to have an overview of what this section is about, what it's trying to test us, and how we should generally approach the questions in this section. Okay, so critical reasoning. What is it about? Critical reasoning is a section that tests our reasoning skills, evaluating or making arguments, constructing arguments, and then finding missing information that completes the argument. And the GMAT exam does not expect us to have any sort of additional background or expertise or technical knowledge in the topic of the question that is being presented. So you can rest assured that you don't need to have sort of business or accounting or finance information or background to answer critical reasoning sections or anything like that. It's just purely logic and some basic math involved in critical reasoning, and obviously kind of cautious reading skills. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper into what all that really means. Okay, so critical reasoning structure, a typical question would usually look like this. They'll give you sort of like a passage, like a prompt that usually involves several sentences. Example like this. Most serious students are happy students, and most serious students go to graduate school. Furthermore, all students who go to graduate school are overworked. Oh, by the way, I'm using course book 299 pages, the one with 299 pages, and I'm at page 87. So you can turn to that page to follow more easily, follow the content more easily. Okay, so back to the prompt. Most serious students are happy students, and most serious students go to graduate school. Furthermore, all students who go to graduate school are overworked. So this is our stimulus, our prompt, or the passage that the question is presenting to us. And then you're going to have a question. Which one of the following can be properly inferred from the statement above? Which of the following answer choices, 5 answer choices, can be most properly sort of implied or drawn from the information given, and not or using as little kind of outside information as possible. Little is sort of like maybe not like the best way to put it, but really you don't really need any real outside information to answer these type of questions in critical reasoning section. All right, and then they're going to give you 5 answer choices, and then you're going to pick the answer choice that's going to best answer this question here. All right, so that's an example of a typical critical reasoning question. And then there are different ways that this question can be phrased as which could be strengthened, be used to strengthen the argument above, or which would most weaken the argument above, which is an assumption that the argument above relies on, etc., etc. All right, so now we're going to go into kind of the more granular part of the argument. So you can see that the passage that the question is presenting us, it's going to have several sentences. And then you look a little bit more carefully. You can basically split these sentences into 2 types. One is the argument, or sort of the opinion, or the point that the author or the subject of the question is trying to make. So obviously an argument could be right, could be wrong, we don't know, but it is just an opinion of that author or a person or a group of people or some subject in the passage that is trying to make. And usually our role in these critical reasoning questions is to evaluate that argument. So examples of argument. All professors are ethical, so we don't know whether this is true or not. We cannot, we have not yet have a way to properly evaluate or to prove or disprove it. So this is an opinion. We don't know it's right or wrong, it's debatable. Another example is Mason is professor, so Mason is ethical. So this is also another sort of opinion. Well, Mason is professor is not an opinion. Mason is a professor is sort of well, it is actually not sort of, is a fact. You can know, you can determine whether Mason is a professor or not. But the sentence here, so Mason is ethical, is a conjecture, so it is an opinion, or say another argument, and it's debatable. So we don't know whether Mason is really ethical or not. We only know that Mason is a professor. So because Mason is and because all professors are ethical, so we make the conjecture that Mason is ethical. But whether that's true or not is debatable. So it's very important to know which sentence of the passage, the prompt, or the stimulus, whichever word you like to use, is the argument, because that usually, when a sentence is an argument, then it usually presents the main idea of the argument, and that's going to be what the question in that critical reasoning question is going to revolve around. That's critically important. So the main goal when you read any critical reasoning stimulus is to find out what the main conclusion, the main argument is. Right, and then they can present some fact sets to present it. To accompany or to provide background information or to support that argument. So, for example, the Jacksonville area has just over 1 million residents. So this is a fact. We can really determine whether or not it has over 1 million residents. We can actually determine exactly how many residents there are in Jacksonville. So this is not something that's debatable. The Cincinnati area has almost 2 million residents. Same thing, also a fact, and we can absolutely determine whether it's true or not. The New York area has almost 20 million residents. Same thing. This is a fact set. We can determine whether it's true or not. Right. So back to the original example. Most students are happy students, and most serious students go to graduate school. Furthermore, all students who go to graduate school are overworked. All right. So we can say that these two sentences are also fact sets. We can determine whether they're true or not. And quite frankly, in the critical reasoning section, sometimes the line between a fact set and an argument is kind of blurry. So it's not critical that you have to get them right, which is a fact set, which is an argument or opinion that the author is trying to make. So you don't have to be correct about them 100% of the time, but it's still really important to ask yourself as you go along the passage or you go along the stimulus, whether this sentence is a fact set or is an argument, etc. And that would really help you to get the gist of the argument and avoid a typical problem I see, especially among non-native English speakers, English speaking students, that you read the passage, you don't quite understand what it's trying to say, and then you have to read it again a few more times, and then you read the answer choices, and then you don't really, after you read the first answer choice, you kind of forget what the stimulus is about. So you go back to read the stimulus again, and then you kind of forget about which answer choice you're at. So you keep going over and over between the answer choices and the stimulus. Very time consuming and not very effective, right? So ask yourself the sentences, whether they are fact sets or they are argument, right? And there are different types of critical reasoning question. We don't really need to worry about these right now, as there would be additional critical reasoning video lessons that go deep dive into each of these types. But for now, just know that there are different types of critical reasoning questions. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover in this video is the structure of an argument. Previously, I talked about kind of the conclusion or the main argument of the stimulus. So let's kind of break it down a little bit into further kind of the roles of the sentences. Right. So before we know that each sentence could be either a fact set or an argument. But in terms of argument, there are kind of steps to structure an argument. And the three main kind of components of a argument is, number one is the background information, and basically just a fact set statement sentence that provides the context for the stimulus, for the argument. And the second component of the argument is called the premise. Premise usually either could be a fact set or could also be an argument that is used to provide support for the conclusion. And the conclusion is, well, always an opinion, an argument made by the author. That is the main point that the author is trying to make. So the premise is used to support the conclusion. The background information is just to provide context for the entire argument. So let's apply that and see what's going on. Okay, so this argument here. The expansion of the runway at the Bay City Airport will allow for larger planes to travel to and Bay City, from Bay City. All right, so this expansion will have this benefit. We can temporarily say that this is a fact set. We can determine whether it will or will not allow larger planes to travel because, you know, the expansion is something that's tangible. We know what expansion means. All right, so temporarily, let's call this a fact set. So it sounds like this is just providing kind of background information for the entire argument. So let's continue. These new planes will create a large amount of noise and nuisance for residents who live near the airport. Okay. This also sounds like more like a fact set rather than opinion. And because, you know, again, we can determine whether it's create a large noise or not, and it will impact, it will be a nuisance for residents who live near the airport or not. So sounds like this is also providing extra background information. All right. However, okay, so we're starting to see kind of a change in tone here, kind of contradiction to the previous sentence. However, many of the residents in this neighborhood work in construction, and the contract to expand the runways has been awarded to a local construction company. All right, so this is also a fact set. You know, we can definitely determine this, and we can also determine whether this is true or not. So, yeah, this is a fact set. All right, and contradicting the previous sentence. The previous sentence we're only talking about kind of the airport creating noise nuisance for residents, but then a lot of the residents work in construction, and then the contract has been awarded to a local construction company. So kind of against the interests of the people living near the airport here. All right, so what's going to happen next? Final sentence. Thus, the expansion of the runways will lead to an increased quality of life for the residents of this neighborhood. All right, so you can see that this is an opinion because it's with us trying to say that therefore, and then will lead to an increased quality of life for the residents. This is not something that we know yet. We may be able to determine later, but not something that we can determine yet. So this is something that is still debatable, right? So this is the main idea, main conclusion of the argument. So this is the main point of the argument. And so we can see that because of the people working in construction and then the contract being awarded to local company, this leads to this result. So this sentence number 3 is the premise for the conclusion here. And the first 2 sentences are background information, right? Okay, another component that you sometimes see, but not a lot, not very frequently, is called a counter premise. So the counter premise is basically the opposite of the premise. While the premise supports the conclusion, the counter premise weakens the conclusion. Sometimes you want to use the counter premise to make your argument kind of more well-rounded, and to show that you have taken into account kind of opposition to your argument and you know how to deal with it. Okay, so that is the main idea here. And in the next video, I want to explain a little bit more about how we're going to apply this into practicing.